And I would like to introduce a gentleman to you that probably many of you know or familiar with, a congressman from South Carolina who's quick to speak his mind. Can you give him a warm welcome to, where'd he go? There he is. Come on, Congressman. Bill Owen. Joe Wilson.
And ladies and gentlemen and fellow patriots, it's a real honor for me to be here tonight. You need to be aware, I've got three hats that I have. One is that I'm a part-time resident of Jackson County. I've also spent 10 summers at Camp Carolina Brevard in Transylvania, so I feel like a native, and I get to claim Mark and Debbie Meadows as my part-time congressperson, so this is good. I'm also very grateful to be here as a member of Congress to thank you. Thank you for the political revolution here in North Carolina, and thank you for electing Mark. He's making such a difference standing up for limited government and expanded freedom. And then finally, I'm so grateful to be here as a South Carolinian. We have a president, we have an administration not to tell the truth. Now you're going to see makes them tell the truth. It's unbelievable. It's great. God.
How many? It's been a great pleasure this time, ladies and gentlemen, to somebody who is obviously very well respected by everybody here. I'd like to say a few words too, however, that come from the heart. I met this individual about 6 months before he was actually elected into office, and I had the occasion to sit down and chat and listen to the heart of this man. And we can always talk about politics, and we can talk about records, and we can talk about so many things. But one thing we all know is that across this nation there's such an apathy, and there's such people being fed up with just politics, or anybody that would even aspire to political office. Is that not correct? To the point that it really takes a tremendous amount of character for somebody of noble intention to stand up and come forward and put themselves out like these gentlemen have done here tonight. I spent about 15 or 20 minutes, I guess, the first time I ever spoke with Congressman Mark Meadows, and I was struck by the character, by the conviction of the man's heart. I went home that evening and told my wife, you'll never believe I met this guy, and it was so refreshing to see somebody who truly was committed to the values of faith and freedom that make our country what it is. You know, if you don't know him, I guess that sounds like political speak, but I can tell you this is a man of great conviction, a man who's shown himself, who's shown his mettle in the time he's been in office already. He's a guy that, if you listen to the liberal media, actually almost destroyed the nation in a day, which is pretty significant because the occupant of the White House now spent his whole life service trying to do that and hadn't managed it yet. But anyway, I'd like to give a warm Henderson County welcome to a man who really is a man who aspires to office for the right reasons, who serves us well, and I appreciate him so very, very much. Congressman Mark Meadows.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Turnout. Thank you, guys. It is truly just an honor to serve you and serve as your representative. Congressman Joe Wilson, you know, he tells folks on a regular basis that I'm his congressman, and that's just quite an honor coming from a guy who not only serves, but he serves because he loves our veterans. I mean, you tell about a defender of our veterans. Congressman Joe Wilson knows it's his heart. And would y'all please give another round of applause to Congressman Joe Wilson. When you run for office, you learn very quickly that it is a humbling experience. There are a lot of people who will share a number of things, but only your friends can really tell you what they really think. So Steve Odom from over there in Graham County, I saw him tonight, and he says, now listen, we don't want to hear much from you. We've got plenty of pictures of you, plenty have heard you. We want to hear from Trey Gowdy. So thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. Linda, that was sitting at the same table, said almost the same thing. She said, you better have prepared a very good speech. We had to wait a long time to get our food, and it better be awful good. And so I just want to just say thank you. I will not leave here tonight until I've had a chance to shake everybody's hand and do one thing. And that is to say thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for your friendship. But most of all, thank you for fighting the fight with me to reclaim our country and take it back once and for all. Thank you so much. This is the first annual Faith and Freedom gathering, and so when you order a banner, you do those, and they said, well, we can put a patch to make sure it's the second and the third, because as a fiscal conservative, you don't want to ever buy anything that you can't reuse again. And so I've been assured that we can do that, but I also want to focus our attention before we go to Mr. Gowdy. I want to focus our attention on the faith part of that. Because Pastor Greg led us in an opening prayer, we'll have a closing prayer. But there has never been a greater attack on our religious liberties as there has been in the past couple of years. I'm here tonight to tell you that it is tragically that there was 3 boys that were kidnapped by terrorists in Israel on their way home to Shabbat, which is their Sabbath. They were walking and disappeared. Now we know the rest of the story because tragically they found those bodies just this week. And I've had the opportunity to be with some of their family members in my office as we've tried to make sure that the nation that loves freedom and loves their faith is willing to speak up. And it was with great tears that a mom or an aunt was there with me, and she was sharing how truly that if it weren't for America making sure that our faith stands strong, tall, and free, that the rest of the world seems to look the other way. I also want to share a story of a mom who has 2 children, 2 American citizens that were in a Sudanese prison just a few days ago. She was put there because of her faith and because she would not renounce her Christian faith. She was sentenced to death and 100 lashes. And because of many people in Congress, many people across this nation that would not allow that to go unnoticed, she is safe today with her 2 children and not in prison. And that, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are willing to speak up. I've met with over 80 ambassadors, and each one of them tell me the same thing. They want what we have. Many of them may not admire who we are, but they want what we have. And so when you read the headlines and you see that perhaps we have an executive overreach, that's an understatement. When perhaps we have lost our way, just remember, we still live in the greatest country, in the greatest place in the world. Truly. So most of you didn't come here to hear me tonight. You came to hear what I refer to as the gentleman from South Carolina. There are times where some in the liberal press do not call him a gentleman. But I will say that my good friend Trey Gowdy is the best prepared person in all of Congress. And I thought I was. I would spend hours and hours researching and being prepared, and I sat next to Congressman Trey Gowdy at a hearing, and I looked over, and not only did he have the questions, he had the answers, he had the possible answers, he had it all lined up, and sure enough, I mean, he would ask a question. I think that particular one was something about somebody smoking pot in the park service or something. But he had the answers all worked out. And I knew right then that we had someone that was not only very smart, but very capable. Many of you will never know that in his former life as a prosecutor, that he was an excellent prosecutor. Now, he would say that he wasn't a very good prosecutor, but he did it for a long time. But he had a record of 169 wins and 0 losses. And so that's who I want on my side. So let's ask up Congressman Trey Gowdy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would move here if y'all didn't already have such a great congressman. I don't get that reception at home. So thank you. Before I address Congressman Meadows, I want to say a word about my colleague and friend from South Carolina. And I want to say this about Joe Wilson. In January of 2011, there were 4 freshmen from South Carolina: Mickey Mulvaney, Jeff Duncan, Timmy Scott, and myself. And we didn't have a clue what committees to ask for. We didn't know how to vote. We didn't know where to vote. And so Joe Wilson, despite the fact that he'd already raised 4 sons, took the 4 of us, 2 of whom were discipline problems, under his wing. And Congressman Wilson, you went so far beyond friendship and esprit de corps and collegiality to help the 4 of us get exactly where we needed to be, to use whatever meager talents we had. I want to say thank you, and I also want to say thank you for this. Joe won't tell you this, but I will. He's got 4 boys, all of whom have worn a uniform for this country. The last time I said that, his wife Roxanne spoke up and said, so I guess I had nothing to do with that. So I took that class in high school. Yes, it was both of them together. So you please tell Mrs. Wilson that I made reference to her as well, for both of our sakes. Mark Meadows. I never leave South Carolina. This is rare for me. Number one, my probation officer is a jerk, and it's hard to get permission to leave. I am married, you wouldn't know it by looking at me, but I am married to one of the most beautiful women in the world. We will celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary in August. I assume that's for me and not for her. She's not that hard to live with, honestly. It's been easy. We live right beside a golf course, and we have every ESPN sports channel that you can have. So there's no reason for me to ever leave South Carolina, except that I love Mark Meadows. I told my wife I'm going to stay home when we're not in D.C. I will stay home. So I woke up this morning and she had my list of chores for me to do, and I looked at the list and I said, baby, I can't vacuum and mop today because I am going to North Carolina for Congressman Meadows. And here I am. Now, the best thing about freshmen in Congress is that eventually they become sophomores. That's the only good thing I can say about freshman members of Congress. Now that I'm not one anymore, they don't know anything. Honestly. We'd be better off as a nation if we just kind of sat them on the bench and didn't let them vote and didn't let them participate. But your congressman, in a short period of time, on the committee that I serve with him on, is already a leader. Watch the hearings. Watch the hearings, and he does all of that without having 3 years of his life in law school. He's not a lawyer, but he questions people like one. Here's a compliment I can give your congressman. When Jimmy Jordan or Mulvaney or the rest of us, Jason Chaffetz and I are off in a room plotting what's next for the IRS or what's next on Fast and Furious or what's next on whatever scandal you want, and this is an off-the-books meeting, we invite your congressman to that meeting because he's smart, and he's prepared. So thank you for him. July 4th will be a vivid reminder, a celebration, if you will, of our heritage, our independence, our freedom, our destiny as a nation. We're a few weeks removed. There's a stark reminder that freedom and heritage came very steep price. So it's a great time for me in between these two, I don't like the word holiday, but in between these two observances, for me to reflect on what it means. I fly into a city monuments, Lincoln, King, World War I. Every building is named for somebody famous. There are statues and portraits within the... Joe and I served with two men who were... with folks sacrificed and served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Tommy Cotton, Tammy Duckworth come to mind, and in Tammy's case, that service and that sacrifice was mighty. Friends, to look at the monuments. If I don't lean forward in my seat to look at the in my seat, to look at the hills punctuated by white crosses. It's elegant, it's symmetrical, it's tragically beautiful from the sky. And it's easy from the sky because you can just see and you can just generationally or as a group, we're those who served and sacrificed, but you don't have to get out of the plane and look and see that every one of them was like us. They had the same hopes, the same dreams, the same aspirations. They opposed them or they did away with them. which is what wanted us to be as a country. Was your service and sacrifice worth it? Is our culture what you wanted it to be? Is our politics what you wanted it to be? And I hope and I pray that the answer doesn't come back. Son, it was. But what are you doing? I served. I sacrificed. What are you? Country Gowdy, what are you doing to change it? I served. I sacrificed. I did what I was asked to do. What are you doing? So ask yourself, what does it mean to be an American? For me, you ask me about this country and my mind goes straight to the wall. It is what separates from other countries. Our respect for the rule of the law. Force in our culture, it is the most and greatest force in our same day, and the poor have to pay their taxes. We're a nation of law. So what are we to do when we have an executive that doesn't follow the law? And you may say, well, what are you talking about? Heck, just look at the last 5-4 on the HHS mandate. That's not just the law, that's a constitutional principle. And you're playing games with it for political expediency, mythological war on women that unfortunately some of our fellow citizens will buy into. I do want to give the president credit for one thing. Now, you're my witness. I'm going to give him credit for something. He said he was going to unify the country and bring people who disagree together. And doggone if he didn't do it with a 9-0 opinion by the Supreme Court. He got together. So congratulations, Mr. President. 9-0. That you can't make appointments when the Senate takes a break for lunch. He's supposed to be a constitutional law expert, and I am amazed at how often he is wrong. The question is he negligently wrong or intentionally wrong? And the question is, are we going to do anything about it? Which leads me to this point. And by the way, it's not just the HHS mandate. It's not just recess appointments. It's not just the so-called Affordable Care Act. You see what he did yesterday? He got a bad Supreme Court decision, so the way Washington works is we want to change the subject. We don't want to talk about religious liberty and executive branch overreach. We want to blame the Republicans on immigration. Can you imagine the unmitigated temerity to refuse to enforce current law and then the fact that somebody... But that's what he did yesterday. He won't enforce current immigration laws, and we're supposed to change the law so he can have another set of laws that he won't enforce if it suits him not to do it. None of those are my favorite example. My favorite example is an old, as Mark pointed out, washed-up prosecutor, are the mandatory minimum drug sentences. Most of you look like you have not had that much experience with the criminal justice system. So I will tell you, trust me when I tell you this, X amount of drugs gets you X amount of time in prison. It's called a mandatory minimum. We have them in all kinds of cases. We have them in murder cases. We have them in child sexual assault cases. We have them in burglary cases. It means a judge cannot give you less than this amount of time. And Congress passed mandatory minimums for drug cases. But Eric Holder doesn't like mandatory minimums, and that's fine. You may not like them either, but it's the law. And if you don't like the law, you change the law, right? I mean, that's the way the system works. But not this Attorney General. He's just decided he's not going to enforce mandatory minimum laws. I understand the Republican outrage. I understand it. I'm part of it. What I don't understand is how many of our fellow citizens just don't seem to give a damn. And Mark and Joe and I are on the floor of the House. The president walks in and says, I'll do it with or without you. I'll do it with or without this branch of government. And half of our colleagues stand and clap. If we're ever trusted to lead again, and we don't hold our own president to a higher standard than they hold theirs, you need to get rid of us. So how do you get a new... If you can't win on a message of the equal application of the law for everyone, if you can't win on a message that we need a foreign policy that you don't make up on the backside of a napkin as things happen, look at our foreign policy. If any of you can tell me what our foreign policy is. Just explain what our long-term strategy is. If any of you can do that, Meadows will give you $100. We have a feckless foreign policy, an anemic economic. I'm a law expert. Message. I was in Houston this weekend. People said this. I don't think our courts will allow it. God knows they'll allow it. They'll kill them in the cradle. How about the way that we communicate? Maybe that's what to focus on between now and November, and certainly in 2016. For 16 years, Congressmen, people who could not get out of jury service, made a living. They didn't know the clerk of court. They didn't know the sheriff. They couldn't get out. That's what I did. And let me tell you, 51-49 will win in politics. It won't win in a courtroom. It has to be 12-0. And in death penalty cases, it has to be 24-0. Not a single person can disagree with you and you win a criminal trial. And the standard of proof, beyond a reason, I don't have to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt to vote for me. I just have to convince you the other person's worse than I am. So how do we communicate in the courtroom? How do you communicate in your everyday lives? Any of y'all married? You ever insulted your wife or husband into changing his or her mind? I can tell you my household, number one, I'm terrified to try. Number two, it wouldn't work. I've known my wife for 30 years. Even if I were right, if I didn't communicate it the right way, she would go to her grave never, ever, ever admitting that I was. Never. That's just the way we're wired. So we don't even try. You got a coworker, try your coworker into changing his or her mind. In church? How do you persuade? Facts, evidence, credibility, a relationship. I come from a really conservative district. Jim DeMint held a seat once removed before me. But we got to find a way to communicate in California. Let me tell you where they're headed, where the other side's headed. Texas. Man, if we lose Texas, there is no electoral map under which we can prevail. So instead of playing defense, I think we ought to start playing offense. And I think we ought to start with something kind of novel. If you want to convince people that you're going to govern differently, then you need to campaign and act differently. People are sick and tired of the same old politics that they grew up with, which is why your confidence in historic low. You don't have confidence in the executive branch, you don't have confidence in the judicial branch, and heavens knows you don't have confidence in the branch. So why would we keep doing things the exact same way? People don't require you to be perfect, they just require you to be honest. We can start with the IRS. I'll tell you what, do this for me. Next time they call you, tell them you just can't find the emails. Don't know what happened. Try it. I tell you, it's been sad to watch that investigation unfold. It is, the IRS, I would imagine, you ask it. So when they target people based on political ideology, that's a big deal. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Bull Moose, Whig, it doesn't matter. It's a big deal when anybody targets you based on your political ideology. Here's what I want you to do tonight. I want you to think back through the different excuses and defenses that you were given for the IRS. Go all the way back to the very beginning. You remember how you found out that there was a targeting scandal? Lois Lerner planted a question at a conference. The most transparent administration since the earth cooled, planted a question at a conference. That's how you found out about it. And then that didn't work, so she said it was 2 rogue agents in Cincinnati. That didn't work, even though the White House perpetuated that myth as well. That didn't work, so they went to another line of defense. Next line of defense was, well, we're not smart enough to have concocted a scheme this elaborate. They may be right about that, but that defense didn't work. So then they went to the next defense, which is, well, yeah, we did a lot of bad things, but we didn't just do those bad things to conservatives. We mistreated everybody. And then it was, well, this doesn't go all the way to the White House. I know Jay Carney said 2 rogue agents, and I know the president said not a smidgen of corruption, but no, unless you can prove that the president himself made the decision to target this individual, it's not really a scandal. And then we get to the Fifth Amendment. Lois Lerner. She's going to target you if you have the temerity to want to educate people about their constitutional rights, but she sure is going to hide behind it the first time she gets a chance to. You know what they call defendants that have 7 different defenses at trial? Inmates. If we can't win with the state of affairs in this country right now, I cannot imagine a scenario better suited for us, which makes me fearful that we're going to do something to mess it up. So, do this on a celebratory note. Do this. On July the 4th, Mark is exactly right. I just read a book on North Korea. You imagine living in a country where it's a crime to possess a Bible? You imagine living in a country where you can't worship the way you want to worship? You have no choice of political candidates. You may not like any of them, but at least you got a choice here. I'd rather have our problems and our challenges than anybody else's problems or challenges. Having said that, we can do better. We can do better than to have an executive, legislative, and judicial branch that you don't respect. We can do better than using political agencies like the IRS and the Department of Justice as weapons against our fellow citizens. We can do better than having elected officials that are nothing good for nothing other than be the punchline of a joke. We are better than that. And I want you on July the 4th to do what I'm going to do on July the 4th, which is thank the Lord for the circumstances of our birth. That we were born into this country or that we came to this country. And ask yourself that same thing that I want to ask myself every time I look over and see Arlington, which is what am I doing to preserve it, to make sure that their sacrifice and their service, that they never, ever regret it. We are still the greatest experiment in the history of mankind. But friends, we need to win again. And we need to start in November. Thank you and God bless you.